The atomic bomb attacks on Japan. In August 1945, during the final stage of World War II, the United States dropped two atomic bombs on Japan. These bombings took place in the cities of Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki on August 9, 1945. They remain the only instances in history where nuclear weapons were used in warfare. The first bomb, called Little Boy, was dropped on Hiroshima. It caused massive destruction within seconds. Buildings were flattened, fires spread rapidly, and tens of thousands of people were killed instantly. Many survivors suffered severe burns, radiation sickness, and long-term health problems. 3 days later, the second bomb, Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki, leading to similar devastation. The United States justified the use of atomic bombs by arguing that it would force Japan to surrender quickly and prevent a prolonged war, which could have resulted in even greater loss of life on both sides. Shortly after the bombing of Nagasaki, Japan announced its surrender on August 15, 1945, officially ending World War II. However, the atomic bombings have been a subject of intense debate and moral questioning. Critics argue that the attacks caused unnecessary civilian suffering and that Japan was already close to surrender. The long-term effects of radiation continued to harm survivors, known as hibakusha, for decades through cancer, genetic damage, and social discrimination. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki changed the course of history. They marked the beginning of the nuclear age and raised global concerns about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Since then, many countries have worked toward nuclear disarmament and peace, though nuclear threats still exist today. In conclusion, the atomic bomb attacks on Japan were a turning point in world history. They ended World War II, but at a tremendous human cost. These events serve as a powerful reminder of the destructive power of nuclear weapons and the importance of promoting peace and preventing future wars. Global impact and lessons learned after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The world entered a new and dangerous era. Countries realized that nuclear weapons had the power to destroy entire cities within moments. This led to fear, tension, and an arms race, especially during the Cold War, when powerful nations like the United States and the Soviet Union competed to build more nuclear weapons. International organizations such as the United Nations were strengthened to promote peace and prevent another world war. Several treaties were later introduced, including the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NPT, to limit the spread of nuclear weapons and encourage disarmament. Despite these efforts, many countries still possess nuclear arms, keeping the threat alive. The survivors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have shared their stories with the world to warn future generations. Their experiences highlight the importance of humanity, ethics, and responsibility in scientific progress. The atomic bombings taught the world that technological power, without moral control, can lead to unimaginable destruction. Today, Hiroshima and Nagasaki stand as symbols of peace. Memorials and museums remind people of the tragedy and encourage nations to resolve conflicts through dialogue instead of violence. The lessons from these events urge the global community to work together for a future free from nuclear weapons. Ethical debate and historical reflection. The use of atomic bombs on Japan raised serious ethical and moral questions that continue to be discussed today. Many historians believe the bombings were intended to demonstrate military power and influence global politics after World War II. Others argue that diplomatic alternatives were not fully explored before using such devastating weapons. The attacks mainly affected innocent civilians, including women, children, and the elderly. Entire families were destroyed in seconds, and the suffering lasted for generations due to radiation exposure. This has led to ongoing debates about whether the bombings were justified or a violation of human rights. Over time, historians, leaders, and peace activists have reflected on these events to ensure such tragedies never happen again. Educational programs around the world now teach about the dangers of nuclear warfare and emphasize peaceful conflict resolution. Remembering Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not only about history, it is a warning. It reminds humanity of the responsibility to choose peace over destruction and to value human life above political or military goals. Hope for a nuclear-free future. In recent decades, many nations and global movements have worked toward reducing the danger of nuclear weapons. Peace organizations, activists, and survivors of nuclear attacks continue to raise awareness about the devastating consequences of nuclear war. Their efforts aim to pressure governments to choose disarmament over destruction. Japan, especially Hiroshima and Nagasaki, plays an important role in promoting nuclear peace. Every year, peace ceremonies are held to honor the victims and to remind the world of the need for harmony and cooperation among nations. Young people are educated about the past so they can build a safer future. Advances in diplomacy, international law, and communication have shown that conflicts can be resolved without violence. Agreements between countries to reduce nuclear stockpiles give hope that one day the world may be free from nuclear weapons. The tragedy of the atomic bombings teaches humanity a powerful lesson. True strength lies not in weapons, but in compassion, understanding, and unity. By remembering history and learning from it, the world can move toward lasting peace. Conclusion. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain one of the most tragic events in human history. While they brought an end to World War II, they also caused immense human suffering and long-lasting damage to both people and the environment. The loss of innocent lives and the pain endured by survivors cannot be forgotten. These events remind the world of the destructive power of nuclear weapons and the responsibility that comes with scientific and military advancement. History shows that war leaves deep scars, but peace builds a future. Nations must learn from the past and work together to prevent such disasters from ever happening again. In today's world where conflicts still exist, the lesson of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is more important than ever. Dialogue, cooperation, and mutual respect among countries are the true paths to global peace. Remembering this tragedy helps humanity choose wisdom over violence and hope over fear. Message to future generations. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not only about war and destruction, but also about responsibility toward future generations. Young people today must understand the consequences of violence so they can make better choices tomorrow. Education plays a key role in spreading awareness about peace, tolerance, and global cooperation. Technology should be used to improve human life, not to destroy it. Scientists, leaders, and citizens all share the duty to ensure that knowledge is guided by ethics and humanity. The atomic bombings remind us that power without wisdom can be dangerous. If the lessons of history are remembered, the world can avoid repeating its mistakes. By choosing peace, justice, and understanding, future generations can create a safer and more hopeful world for everyone. Importance of peace and international cooperation. The atomic bombings showed that no country can remain safe if nuclear weapons exist. One nation's actions can affect the entire world. Therefore, international cooperation is essential to maintain global peace. Countries must work together to solve conflicts through discussion, negotiation, and mutual respect instead of war. Peace talks, cultural exchanges, and international agreements help build trust among nations. When countries understand each other better, the chances of violence decrease. History proves that peace is always more powerful and lasting than war. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki encourages the world to reject hatred and violence. By learning from past mistakes, humanity can move toward a future where wars are avoided and human life is valued above all else. Humanitarian perspective and healing. After the atomic bombings, Japan faced the long and painful process of recovery. Hospitals were overwhelmed, and many people suffered without proper medical care. Doctors and volunteers worked tirelessly to help survivors, even though they themselves were affected by radiation. This period showed the importance of humanity, kindness, and support in times of crisis. Over the years, Japan rebuilt its cities and focused on peace and development. Hiroshima and Nagasaki transformed from symbols of destruction into symbols of resilience and hope. The strength of the people proved that even after great tragedy, healing and rebuilding are possible. This humanitarian response teaches the world that compassion is essential after conflict. Helping victims, respecting human dignity, and supporting recovery are just as important as preventing war itself. Responsibility of world leaders. World leaders hold great responsibility in maintaining peace and preventing the use of nuclear weapons. Decisions made by powerful nations can affect millions of innocent lives. Therefore, leaders must act wisely, keeping humanity and global safety above political interests. Strong leadership means choosing diplomacy over violence and cooperation over conflict. History has shown that wars cause destruction, while peaceful dialogue leads to progress. Leaders must learn from the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki and ensure that such weapons are never used again. By working together and respecting international laws, world leaders can protect future generations from the horrors of nuclear. The United States atomic bombings of Japan: causes, context, and consequences. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945 marked one of the most significant and controversial events in modern history. These bombings, carried out by the United States during the final stages of World War II, resulted in unprecedented destruction and loss of life, ultimately leading to Japan's surrender. Understanding why the U.S. resorted to such a drastic measure requires examining the military, political, and historical context of the time. Historical context. By mid-1945, World War II had been raging for 6 years. In Europe, Nazi Germany had surrendered in May, leaving Japan as the primary Axis power, still resisting the Allied forces. Japan had demonstrated fierce determination in the Pacific, fighting battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa, with high casualties on both sides. The Japanese military culture emphasized honor and sacrifice, often preferring death to surrender, which concerned the Allies about the potential cost of invading Japan. The Manhattan Project and the atomic bomb. The development of the atomic bomb was part of the Manhattan Project, a top-secret U.S. research program initiated in 1942. Scientists, including notable figures such as Robert Oppenheimer and Enrico Fermi, worked to harness nuclear fission to create a powerful weapon. The goal was to develop a decisive military tool that could end the war swiftly. By July 1945, the first successful test of an atomic bomb in New Mexico, the Trinity test, demonstrated the bomb's immense destructive power. The U.S. government now faced a decision on whether to use this weapon against Japan. Reasons for using the atomic bomb: forcing Japan's surrender. The primary reason for dropping the bombs was to compel Japan to surrender unconditionally. Despite conventional bombing campaigns and a naval blockade that had devastated Japanese cities and infrastructure, Japanese leaders were reluctant to surrender, partly due to the emperor's desire to retain his position and preserve Japan's national identity. Avoiding a land invasion, U.S. military planners estimated that a conventional invasion of Japan, Operation Downfall, could result in up to 1 million American casualties and tens of millions of Japanese casualties. The atomic bomb was seen as a way to end the war swiftly and save lives in the long term, despite its immediate catastrophic effects. Demonstrating power to the world. The bomb also served as a geopolitical signal, particularly to the Soviet Union. By demonstrating its nuclear capabilities, the United States could strengthen its post-war position and influence global power dynamics. Psychological shock. The unprecedented destruction of an entire city was expected to shock Japan into surrender. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were chosen as targets partly because of their military and industrial significance, as well as their symbolic impact. The bombings and immediate consequences. On August 6, 1945, the U.S. dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing approximately 70,000 to 80,000 people instantly, with tens of thousands more dying later from radiation sickness and injuries. 3 days later, on August 9th, the second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing an estimated 40,000 to 75,000 people immediately. These bombings caused unprecedented human suffering and devastation, ultimately leading Japan to announce its surrender on August 15, 1945, effectively ending World War II. Controversy and legacy. The use of atomic bombs remains highly controversial. Critics argue that Japan was already on the brink of surrender, and diplomatic alternatives could have been explored. Supporters contend that the bombings prevented an even bloodier invasion and accelerated the war's end. The events also marked the beginning of the nuclear age, raising profound ethical, political, and humanitarian questions about the use of nuclear weapons. questions that remain relevant today. Conclusion. The atomic bombings of Japan were the result of a combination of military necessity, strategic calculation, and technological opportunity. While they ended World War II, they also caused immense human suffering and introduced the world to the terrifying power of nuclear weapons, a power that continues to shape international relations and moral debates nearly 80 years later. Long-term effects on Japan. The aftermath of the bombings left deep and lasting scars on Japan, both physically and psychologically, human casualties and health impact. Tens of thousands of people died instantly, and many more suffered from severe injuries, burns, and radiation sickness. Survivors known as hibakusha faced long-term health problems, including increased cancer rates, chronic illnesses, and genetic effects on later generations. Destruction of cities and infrastructure. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were largely destroyed. Housing, hospitals, schools, and factories were flattened, leaving survivors homeless and without basic services. The reconstruction of these cities took years, highlighting the massive economic and social cost of nuclear warfare. Psychological trauma survivors experienced lasting psychological effects such as post-traumatic stress, grief, and anxiety. The bombings also left a deep cultural memory in Japan, influencing art, literature, and national identity for decades. Global political and military impact. The beginning of the nuclear age. The use of atomic bombs demonstrated the unprecedented destructive potential of nuclear weapons. This started a global arms race, most notably between the United States and the Soviet Union, leading to the Cold War. Shift in warfare ethics. The bombings sparked worldwide debates about morality and international law. Questions about civilian casualties, proportionality, and the ethics of nuclear weapons continue to influence military and political policies today. International treaties and nuclear control. The devastation highlighted the need for nuclear regulation. Over time, treaties such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, NNPT, and various arms control agreements emerged to limit the spread and use of nuclear weapons. Lessons learned. The atomic bombings of Japan teach several crucial lessons for humanity. The importance of diplomacy. Many argue that alternative strategies could have ended the war without nuclear devastation. The need for global cooperation. Nuclear weapons have global consequences. Managing them requires international dialogue and treaties. Human cost of war. Even a war ending victoriously can come at an unimaginable human and ethical price. Conclusion. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were more than military actions. They were transformative events that reshaped global politics, warfare, and ethics. They forced humanity to confront the destructive potential of science when applied to war and left a legacy that continues to influence international relations, nuclear policy, and collective memory. The tragedy emphasizes the need for peace, diplomacy, and caution in the age of nuclear weapons. Japan's surrender in the end of World War II. The atomic bombings, combined with the Soviet Union declaring war on Japan on August 8, 1945, created an overwhelming situation for the Japanese government. Facing the devastation of its cities and the prospect of further attacks, Japan accepted the Allied demand for unconditional surrender. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced Japan's surrender in a radio broadcast, marking the official end of World War II. The formal surrender ceremony took place aboard the USS Missouri on September 2, 1945. The bombings played a critical role in convincing Japanese leaders that continuing the war would lead to total annihilation. While Japan's military had hoped to negotiate conditional surrender terms, the scale of destruction forced a full capitulation, saving many from an even bloodier invasion. Post-war reconstruction of Japan. After the surrender, Japan faced immense challenges. Economic and infrastructure rebuilding cities like Hiroshima and Nagasaki had been completely destroyed. The Allied occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, oversaw rebuilding efforts, infrastructure restoration, and industrial revitalization. Over the next decade, Japan underwent a remarkable economic recovery, eventually becoming one of the world's leading industrial powers. Political and social reforms under Allied supervision Japan adopted a new constitution in 1947, renouncing war, Article 9, and establishing democratic governance. Social reforms included expanded education, women's rights, and labor protections, which reshaped Japanese society. Nuclear awareness and anti-war sentiment. The bombings instilled a lasting anti-nuclear sentiment in Japan. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of peace advocacy, hosting annual memorial ceremonies and promoting global awareness about the dangers of nuclear weapons. Global reflection and lessons. The bombings sparked worldwide discussions on the morality, legality, and necessity of nuclear weapons. Ethical debate. Historians and ethicists continue to debate whether the bombings were justified. Supporters argue they saved lives by avoiding a prolonged invasion, while critics claim Japan was already close to surrender and that alternatives could have been pursued. Nuclear arms race. The bombings demonstrated the destructive power of nuclear weapons, leading to the Cold War arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union. The threat of nuclear annihilation shaped international relations for decades. Peace and disarmament movements. Hiroshima and Nagasaki inspired movements advocating nuclear disarmament and global peace. Organizations such as the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN, continue to fight for a world free of nuclear threats.